I was looking at our force velocity profiles and just kind of like where I started looking at everything. And I remember when I first started looking at this data, it was very confusing. And the one thing that I wanted to do is figure out how to model this over a 40-yard dash. If I'm training guys for the 40-yard dash, typically I'm looking at, you know, what am I going to implement before I start training these guys to collect data? And it didn't make sense to me when I first was going through this. So I figured I'd look at this entire profile over the course of 40 yards and at three different levels. So the first level is mechanical properties that are present during a sprint. Our force quality on the left side in black is telling us a lot about how the athlete accelerates early. So how much force are they producing into the ground to initiate their sprint? We know that there's a high correlation between force and acceleration, right? So the athlete that can accelerate early has a high amount of force production, and specifically horizontal force in this case. The second quality we're looking at is power. So power to me covers literally everything from weight acceleration all the way through velocity. So it's an athlete's ability to have force present while they're gaining velocity. It's a mixture of the two. It's telling us about really the balance between the two qualities that the athlete has between force and velocity. So some athletes are more velocity-based power dominant. Some athletes are more force-based power dominant. They both can have the same power, same split time, but they're deriving it from two different directions. But very important to understand that power is derived typically in a regular sprint after 1 second or right before 1 second. So around zero point 0.8 to 1.2 seconds total, the athlete is producing their peak power, and then their power will drop off after that. So an athlete has force on one side and velocity on the other, and that gives us power. Second down there, looking at force application. So in the beginning, we know that the high ratio force percentage is representative of an athlete's ability to be horizontal in the first part of the sprint. So can the athlete direct their forces horizontally? You have two forces, vertical, horizontal. That's resultant force. How much of that resultant force is horizontal? That's the beginning of a sprint, first 0.5 seconds. Then we look at DRF, which is the decrease in ratio of force as velocity increases. So as we go from horizontal transitioning to vertical, how fast does that force, that vector force, which is horizontal, how fast does that drop off over time? So we want to see that literally stay high enough to continue to accelerate up to velocity, because as soon as the velocity is reached, the athlete has primarily vertical force into the ground. So you see right here, I modeled this one at 30. The athlete hits their peak velocity around 30 here, and their vertical force production is really the dominant, case here. So looking back, like I remember the force number, I remember trap bar deadlift, and really what that was about was developing enough force to be fast. Now there is a lot of truth to that. And as we go back to our 6 groups, there's athletes that primarily need just to get stronger to run faster. But there's also guys that have maxed out that strength and need to start transitioning that to horizontal. So this is what we can really look at here, is how much of that force that the athlete has is directed horizontally, and then how quickly does it drop off. That's force application. Now, most people, when they think about speed, they think about what are the technical things that are involved in speed. So when athletes call, they think all we're going to do is some technical changes and we're going to help the athlete run faster. Truth is, we like to go through these first two, mechanical and force application properties first, and understand from a physical standpoint, what is this athlete, what are they about? Like, can they actually have the physical tools to run fast? Now, once we've cleared those two things and we understand from the physical side what these athletes need, we want to look at the technical. So the first thing we look at is drive index. Drive index is a measure that we use to quantify really the first 3 to 4 steps. So we're looking at ground contact times, we're looking at air times, we're looking at torso angle, looking at shin angle, looking at hip projection distance, touchdown distance. We're looking at everything that's involved with the success or failure of the first 4 steps from a kinematic side, which means more technical, right? Now, in the second phase transition, we're really looking at steps 3 through 10. We know that step 3 They can be somewhere between 40, 50, maybe in 60% of their velocity. Step 10, you're looking at 80% of that velocity. So this transition is key. Can the athlete transition up to top speed? Going back to our 6 buckets, we know that some athletes can't transition because they don't have the ability to be reactive. They don't have fast enough ground contact times. But the athletes that do have fast ground contact times, when we test, we want to make sure that the transition, there's not an energy leak and there's not something physical or technical that's basically preventing them from reaching a high speed. So what we'll look at in transition is look at contact times. Is the transition smooth? Do their contact times make sense? Like, are they continuing to decrease and air time continuing to increase, right? So is the athlete's contact times getting faster and faster and faster? We're applying more force in a shorter amount of time as we go forward, right? And then lastly, looking at max velocity mechanics. So number one, we want to assess injury risk. Is that athlete too backside? Is there a massive discrepancy between left and right in terms of imbalance? How does the athlete manage each of their phases? Those types of things. So we want to build a model based around the physical qualities, how they produce force, and the technical emphasis. So next, what we'll talk about is how to actually look at this from a program standpoint. And then what we'll do is we'll go through video to actually break down these things on the technical side.